everyone, it's me, Melanie, your IVF nurse, and this video is going to be about intimacy and trying to conceive. Now, according to Oxford Dictionary, when I was looking up what exactly intimacy is, it indicated that intimacy is a close familiarity or friendship, so some type of closeness. It also noted that when used as a euphemism, that it referred to an intimate act such as sexual intercourse. Now, I looked on Wikipedia as well, because many of us do when we're Googling things, go to Wikipedia. And Wikipedia describes intimacy as intimacy involves the feeling of being in a close personal association and belonging together. Now, in looking at the different types of intimacy, when someone's trying to conceive, we're always thinking of the physical aspect of it. So I wanted to elaborate a little bit more on the physical aspect. Physical intimacy is not just the actual act of intercourse. It can be things like holding hands, cuddling, kissing. It does not always have to lead to the actual act of intercourse. Now, when you're trying to conceive, obviously during your peak ovulation, we're always recommending as healthcare professionals in the field that you are having sex at the time of ovulation. However, you also want to be able to maintain a physical connection throughout the cycle as well. So many times I've heard from patients that they only have sex when they ovulate. So some of the things you may want to do is continue to have that physical involvement, which yes, includes some kind of sexual activity for either yourself or you and your partner. The other types of intimacy that people hopefully are exploring as they are trying to conceive is emotional intimacy. So this is when you feel that you can share your innermost thoughts with that person you're with. The next one is intellectual or cognitive intimacy. And this is where you're able to actually discuss your things that you're passionate about. So whether it's politics, religion, things that really kind of get the conversation going, and maybe sometimes with some people you would never discuss these things, only because they can get a little bit heated, but these are the things that really make you think and challenge you intellectually and stimulate your mind. So what you're doing is developing that intellectual intimacy with someone. Now, there are spiritual and experimental, so sometimes these can overlap, and it could be things like when you travel and you go to some beautiful churches, and you share that intimacy in a spiritual aspect when you're, whether it's in worship. Experimental intimacy is when you're mostly like traveling, not necessarily just traveling, but when you're doing things together. So maybe as a couple or as a group of people, depending on your situation, you're doing things that excite the group or you and your partner, or whoever it is that is involved in your circle. Now, with the experimental intimacy, it's things that, help you grow and develop, and when you're exploring new things, so things like traveling, doing things, say, off of a bucket list, maybe things like bungee jumping, traveling to new places, trying new foods, all of those things that you share in the experience of doing what you're doing is experimental intimacy. Now, with regards, because I touched on it briefly, with spiritual intimacy, this is where, a person or couple will grow through a spiritual aspect. So if they find that, when you're trying to conceive, you're either going to your minister, pastor, priest, and getting some spiritual advisement there, because those things can obviously help your relationship as well, because when you're struggling with trying to conceive, sometimes what happens is you think that this is something that's been put upon you as a challenge from the spiritual being above, depending on your religion. So it's kind of, a challenge, and seeking help as a couple is usually recommended in a spiritual way if finding that your religion plays a big part in your relationship. So doing those things together help to develop intimacy. Now, I find a lot of times when people are coming in and speaking to me, I'm learning a lot of different things about their relationship with their partner. And there are times that I've had to, recommend counselors. So counselors can help you explore that as well, whether you start off individually to address any specific needs for yourself, and then you do it as a couple, or however you're going to parent a child once you've conceived. So if you're co-parenting or anything like that, then usually counseling can help just to kind of get everything out in the open and get everybody on the same page and, understanding the same things as you progress through this journey. Now, some of the things that I also found when I was doing some research, there's not a lot of information on the male perspective when you're trying to conceive. I did come across an article in Today's Parent by David Fielding, and it was titled, "Trying to Get Pregnant is Exhausting, a Guy's Perspective." And I found this really interesting, just because I didn't come across many articles that were written on a guy's perspective. And I think it's one thing that, yes, women, they go through, depending on the diagnosis, they're usually the ones that will initially go through the majority of the testing, ultrasound, blood work, sonohistogram. So what I found interesting about this article was that it was a guy's perspective, flat out in the title, only because I'm not finding many articles written on behalf of what it's like for a man. We see a lot on social media about women posting their journeys, and we hear a lot about it just in the media in general about women coming forward and discussing the struggle or bringing more attention to the topic of infertility. So compared to a male's perspective, we're not getting that same amount of feedback from men. So in the article, he wrote how it was initially exciting when his wife had approached him to discuss, I guess, family planning and let's start trying. So he was initially excited about the fact of not using condoms and no more birth controls. However, he does indicate that after a few months passed, there's no luck. They ended up seeing a OB-GYN, and his wife was able to get a prescription for Clomid. Those cycles were unsuccessful. They were then referred to a fertility specialist where they did an official workup. And he did note in the article that his semen analysis came back good and the sperm count was high. And they had met with the doctor to discuss their options. He wrote in the article as well that when they left the clinic, they sat in the car and cried, only because they were overwhelmed from the information they received and just thinking about next steps and what they were going to do. And I guess over time, the way that he had ended the article was that they, being fortunate, ended up conceiving naturally a few weeks later. So they didn't have to really, other than meeting with the doctor and doing the initial workup, they didn't have to do any of those interventions or options that the doctor had. Another article that I had come across as well was from Today's Parent online, so todaysparent.com, and the title was "When Trying to Get Pregnant Takes the Sizzle Out of Sex" by Kathleen Tyrell. Now, the article outlines various tips to rekindle or get back that spark, but one tip that was noted in the article was, don't make it feel like work. You want to be mindful of how your partner is feeling through all of this. Sometimes one partner can begin to feel like an employee when being tasked with successfully getting the job done. Rather than shouting, "It's time from the bedroom when you're ovulating, make it romantic, feel the connection with your partner, and remember that you're in this together. So not a lot of information or articles written on intimacy and trying to conceive, but definitely I think there needs to be more information about it. I found it interesting because I do know that, a lot of people, I've heard feedback that people do say it's like a second job, and that you lose all of the other aspects of intimacy when you're trying to conceive. So it can be very consuming. So you do want to try and incorporate the different types of intimacy into your relationship, because you're in this together and you want to grow as a couple and a family. Each of you are in the struggle together, and each of you will, express your feelings differently. And there are some great resources out there if you should decide that you need counseling, or if you want to go a more spiritual way and speak to your religious leader, whether it's a pastor, minister, etc. Or if you think taking a break and trying some experimental things like traveling, even an afternoon for self-care is always great. We're always preaching about self-care and making sure that, we're getting enough sleep and eating a balanced diet. But things like taking an afternoon to go to an art gallery or to a museum, just to kind of give you something else to talk about, can be helpful, and to also help you remember that you're a couple and you're in this together. And if you're doing it on your own, then there are some great resources out there for you as well, and hopefully you've got someone who is a great support person who can do some of these things with you and help you grow as a person while you're trying to become a parent. I hope you found this information helpful. Please feel free to check out my website, www.YourIVFNurse.com. You can email for information at YourIVFNurse@gmail.com, or you can email me directly at melanie@YourIVFNurse.com. You can follow me on Instagram at YourIVFNurse, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel or comment down below. Thanks for watching. Good luck on your journey.